Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review from season 3, episode 1. I'm doing the show now because this is one of the most requested shows I've had asked to do. My sister's a huge fan of it, so I started watching it, and now I'm all in. So I'm excited to actually break down this whole season and have interviews for this season as well. So make sure to hit that sub button. Now, I'm going to split my review simply into two parts. We're going to go first with everything going on with Tabitha, and then we're just going to hit the main storyline full on. Now, what really got me excited last season as a cliffhanger was Tabitha getting out of this From world and being pushed out of this lighthouse by the boy in white. So I was actually a little disappointed at how they started this storyline. I was a little worried too, because a lot of times in shows, when they have a storyline where someone gets to a different destination, it can drag or get stuck in the mud a bit. But I'll explain why I feel that way. But here we see she is in St. Anthony's Hospital. That is purposely named St. Anthony because it's the saint of lost things. So it makes sense for someone here who is lost. And she's in Camden, Maine. And I think that's intentional too, being Maine, because you think of Stephen King, who was born there, and a lot of his stories take place in the Northeast, and From has very Stephen King vibes in story, tone, and horror. Now, she'll sneak out of the hospital with her clothes and Victor's lunchbox. The security there is absolutely terrible. She'll see the boy in white across the street who pushed her out of the lighthouse window. I think this is very interesting that she's seeing images of people, these things that have haunted her, outside here as well, and it makes me wonder if this is actually even the real world. And she grabs a kid in the coffee shop and she's like, "What do you mean it's the only way?" Just confused, thinking he was the boy. Now, this is where I start getting frustrated, is Tabitha has very little urgency here, and it's kind of brutal. You start feeling like, okay, maybe this is the worst person who would have made it out of the From world. She borrows someone's phone to call her mom. And she's like, "I'm going to tell you everything as soon as I see you." So this is a little bit of annoyance in writing, that's like the justification starting already why she's not just plain out telling her mom what's going on. And this will continue in the confessional booth, where she said she's afraid people are going to think she's crazy. Another justification for her to really slow down and actually being urgent with what's happening, where she just came from, why she's not just going to the police or going to her mom in person and telling her what's happening. That's the part that made me a little annoyed, is that she didn't actually do that. I also laughed hysterically at just a random throwaway line they had here, where the friend of the girl who gave Tabitha the phone goes, "Why would you do that? You seriously need to disinfect your phone now." I just started dying laughing. I don't know why they even threw that line in there. So Tabitha decides then to go to a priest to talk to. In confession, she's like, "I need to talk to someone. I had nowhere else to go." It's like, again, just go to your mom. She has a line here where she is really doubting an existence of God, because she's like, if God is real, he made that terrible place and let my baby fall off the changing table. Remember, that's a big trauma in that family's life, losing that child. But she will eventually tell the priest about this place where monsters come out at night, place no one can leave. And he obviously isn't buying it, but it's interesting to see that a character has information in the real world for the first time, if this is the real world. But she looks in the lunchbox and finds Victor's address, and it leaves on a cliffhanger, which is more exciting now, an idea of her meeting Victor's dad. So we should get a lot of answers from that, being someone who is that connected to Victor, and Victor being one of the most interesting storylines, especially with his past. Now, what I liked a lot more in the episode is everything going on in the main storyline. You see that this episode's whole idea is breaking down Boyd, and I really liked that, because he's been coming on the up now, getting stronger, getting his mojo back, and this is the ultimate challenge he's about to face, and tragedy, which we'll get to. And he's still seeing this priest here. He's talking to the priest in his vision, bringing up all the bad things happening, and the priest is already starting this breaking down of him, so it all feels connected. Like that is what they're going for with Boyd, and that he's saying there's a food shortage, it's getting cold, bad things are happening, and maybe people aren't panicked enough. And Boyd will again bring up what the forest said to him, which is hope is what the forest feeds on. So that's really fascinating, because right now Boyd's been one of the most hopeful characters, and he's the one who's going to suffer one of the worst tragedies of the show to date. Correction, the worst tragedy. Now, we really didn't get into the reaction to what happened to Julie and people like Randall and Marielle from being all possessed last season. Julie's not talking about it. I would have liked one of those characters, though, to have some kind of allusion to what they're feeling. We don't really see that, and I hope they don't just gloss over that. Now, this is a very interesting storyline in the episode with Jim and Kenny, which I thought ended on a very silly note because Jim wants to go to the woods to find Tabitha, and Boyd is rightfully so pleading him not to go into the woods because Boyd's been there and he knows what it's like out there. But Kenny wants to go with him. He's like, we can't play defense forever, which is a good point. But when Jim and Kenny go in the woods, they find these tree statues are cool, adding to the mystery. Like, okay, what is the deal with these statues? I'd love to hear your theories on that. But they find a different hut they're going to stay in, and then at night they reflect. They're like, oh, we probably went in the wrong direction. There's no spider webs here. And all of a sudden, Jim just gets cold feet. He's like, we can't do this. If I die out here, my kids won't have anyone. It's like, really? So you had him so set on going out there, and for him to turn around and just go the other direction was so odd to me in a storytelling aspect. And it wasn't like there was something scary or dramatic enough to make him do that. It was just like, actually, I was wrong. I'm going to go back now. I thought that was really just not great. And it feels like you kind of teased us here and something more exciting is going to happen and just going backwards, like a waste of time. It's also interesting that Jade is losing his mind here with the symbol, and he's in that darkest place of someone like on a Reddit thread from with all these theories just going nuts. But it's good to see that Jade, it seems like towards the end when he's with Boyd, comes back to his senses a bit, even though he's going to be even more traumatized seeing that cow shredded by the monsters. That was crazy. It's also interesting that Kenny's mom, Tien Chen, she wants him to be careful. She tells Kenny before he went to the woods, she's like, I don't want to lose you too, but we'll see what's going to be the reverse, sadly. Now, a storyline that's really suffering is everything that's gone on with Ellis and Fatima. It's been suffering since last season, and Fatima here is just pregnant barfing, we see, and then a non-playable character is knocking on the door and is about to pee on the floor, she says. So these are those moments of From where you kind of just roll your eyes. But where things pick up a bit and actually feel like some of those storylines these type of shows get into that are okay and not the most interesting, like Walking Dead, when they start losing crops and they're trying to figure out how they're going to eat, right? Like Ellis and Donna go to the crops, everything's rotten, they're out of food, so this is when Boyd shows up. Now what's interesting though is that Tien Chen gave the idea to have smaller crops in different locations away from the poisoned soil. So she got to have this great idea. She said goodbye to her son, was worried about him, and she doesn't have food to serve at the diner. So the diner's closed, basically, let's say. So that was a lot of hints that she possibly could die in this episode. It's a classic kind of thing where a certain character gets a lot of importance, and then maybe there's not much for them to do next, that they're going to go. But they need these animals to hold them over in the meantime. I love when Boyd mentions the goats, and we saw earlier in the episode that Randall is trying to take Ethan's goat that he loves, that Ethan just happens to be right at the door listening. It's like, oh my God. And then there's this scene that's just so boring where they're talking about the goat, and he's asking if his goat that he loves can go first so he doesn't have to see his friends die. So it's like, oh, what about the other goats? It's not fair. But you see how much Victor defends Ethan, too, when we originally saw Randall taking the goat. And I can't believe Randall's still in the show, but it looks like they keep teasing a redemption arc for him, and him helping them onto the bus later shows that again, but he always goes back to his old ways, so he's very frustrating. I thought he was going to be done in season 2, so I hope they progress his redemption arc a little faster. But Victor defending Ethan was cool with the gun and standing up for him, but showing too that Boyd had to be a leader here, and he has this speech about hope when there's none left here with no food. That's what makes it all the more tragic of what's going to happen, what he's going to witness later, and him saying this place will not break us. Now there's also a sequence here with Elgin, who's still not sleeping, and he's dozing off while he's sewing in this nightmare, and he's like, I feel like someone is watching me. And it's the bathtub lady again. It's pretty crazy horror sequence. I liked it, and I'm intrigued by what's going on with Elgin and who he's actually seeing. Now, the amazing sequence of this episode and one of the best moments in From is this whole moment where we see the monsters are smarter than we think. They're letting out these animals, and they're baiting Boyd here. This is all to break Boyd. It's like they see it as a challenge, his hope. And of course, Ethan has like a generic stupid kid moment in a show where he sees his goat and opens a door to the house and lets in, of course, the old lady monster. But you see Sarah helps him and Julie, so it's also feeding into Sarah's redemption arc, which they've done more effectively than Randall's, I believe. It's moved at a quicker pace and stayed there where Randall goes back and forth all the time, which can be frustrating. Now, when Tien Chen goes to help Boyd, that's when I knew. I was like, that's it. She's gone this episode because of everything it said that's set up with her and her importance. And it's the perfect innocent character to break Boyd in front of him. And the monsters start quoting Boyd and say, you said this place couldn't break you. And they grab Tien Chen, they swipe Boyd's shoulder. And when they pulled the back of her head, that was brutal. Really disturbing. It reminded me a little of the feeling of Rick seeing Negan hit people's heads in Walking Dead. And Harold Perrineau is an incredible actor. I loved him as Michael in Lost. And his acting here where he's going, look at me, keep your eyes open, and having to watch her get brutally killed by these monsters. unreal. And the show needed a moment like this. This is the most disturbing scene by far. And the show kind of shies away from killing characters, which I like to a sense. But I was like, okay, I think it's time they need a big death here. And I think this is a big death because this is going to really affect Boyd. It's really going to affect the town. How disturbing the death was. It's not just one that, oh, they got caught and killed really quickly. No, this was brutal. And it's going to affect Kenny. So I really was happy they started the season off with a big moment like this, affecting our main character and Boyd too. So how far can he keep himself together here with the most awful thing happening yet? So it's like, really, in the writing sense, it's always exciting when everything's kind of at its low point and trying to see how they react and survive this. So that's what the show definitely needed. So I really like the ending. It's just I had problems with Tabitha's story. I'm already worried about the pace of that, and I am a little annoyed. The show still has those scenes like Fatima barfing and certain lines that are a little goofy, but it's still very enjoyable, and I'm very intrigued by the mystery. So I'm going to give this episode an 8.5, and a lot of that's brought up by everything going on with Boyd in this episode, and especially the ending sequence was one of the best sequences in the show to date. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. I'm also reviewing Penguin at the moment, so make sure to check out those reviews as well. And I'll see you next time.